Hello, everyone. Welcome to Getting Started with Computer Science at Home or in a Socially Distanced Classroom with Sphero. My name is Nina Sclafani. I am the Senior Events Coordinator of Tech, and welcome to Day 3 of the Tech Virtual Summit. We're going to allow about 2 minutes for everyone to enter the space, so get comfortable, get your coffee. You have 2 minutes before we officially start. I hope you've been enjoying the sessions that we've had so far. We have had 2 awesome days already of really excellent presentations, all of which are available on our YouTube page. You can access all of those videos without any password or anything, so go and check those out if you haven't done so already. We'll also send you a link to that in our follow-up email, which you will receive probably within the next 24 hours. In that email, there will be a link to the presentation that you're going to see today, as well as a link to the video and a link to the video page where everything is going to be held. If you are just joining us, welcome to Getting Started with Computer Science at Home or in a Socially Distanced Classroom with Sphero. We're going to start in about 1 minute. See, how many people do we have in this space already? Oh, I can't see with my current view. Oh well, I hope it's a lot. If you haven't registered for the sessions later today, you can do that by going to tech.com, our events page. There you'll see the Tech Virtual Summit 2 site, and there is a list of all of the different sessions that are available over the next 2 days with their registration links. So make sure to check that out. Okay, and with that, hi everyone, my name is Nina Sclafani. I'm the Senior Events Coordinator for Tech, and welcome to Day 3 of the Tech Virtual Summit. You're currently in Getting Started with Computer Science at Home or in a Socially Distanced Classroom with Sphero. If you're new to Zoom, scroll over your screen and you'll see a tab come up at the bottom. There you'll see a Q&A box and a chat box. Click on both of those and they can pop out. Use the chat to let us know where you're from, what you teach, and if there's anything during the presentation that you think is pretty exceptional or you want to comment on, you can do that there. If you have a question for our presenters today, make sure to ask that in the Q&A box, just so we don't miss any of your questions, because if it's in the chat, we might lose it. As I mentioned before, you're going to receive an email in the next 24 hours that has a link to this presentation, so you can watch this video again. It'll also have a link to the slide deck that our presenters are using today, and a link to the rest of the videos that we've had so far with our virtual summit. Last, there will be a line of copy in it that says you can use this email as proof of your attendance. We won't be issuing individual certifications for these, so just make note of that. With that, I would like to introduce Michelle and Jeremy from Sphero. Hi, you guys. Welcome to the summit.
Hi, thanks for having us.
All right.
Well, I will kick it off. I'm actually going to share my screen. Give it a minute. Do you guys see my screen? Yep.
We can see it. And I also did want to mention we have Greg and Emily in the chat box today. They're going to be helping answer any questions that you may have as well.
All right, so as Nina mentioned, today we're going to be talking about getting started with computer science at home or in a socially distant classroom. And just brief introductions for myself and Jeremy. I'm the Senior Director of Education Program Management at Sphero, meaning I work with educators such as yourselves on professional development products and different programs within education. I am a former New York City and Chicago public school teacher. And I'm also joined by Jeremy Macdonald, who is our Senior Education and Training Manager here at Sphero. So he really is the face of Sphero, travels all around the US and the globe, delivering professional development. And he is also a former educator and Director of Technology and Innovation at the Redmond School District. So we're super happy to have him and his expertise today. Quickly, our agenda, we're going to talk about how do you get started with computer science when you've never taught computer science before, and specifically introducing it to some of our younger students. Then we'll dive into Sphero's approach to teaching computer science through our CS Foundations course, and we'll end with some guides on how to use Sphero in little bits in a socially distant classroom as well as at home, as we know that is very relevant right now, and how do you use these hands-on products and this new environment. And then I'll talk about a giveaway at the very end. But first, I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy to kick us off about getting started with computer science.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Excited to be here with everyone today. As Michelle mentioned, it's been a long time in the public education myself, from 3rd grade through 5th grade to 6th grade, language development, instructional coaching, district administration, kind of ran the gambit there, but excited to be here to share what we're doing with Sphero, but also share some insights into integrating computer science, but also computational thinking into everything you do in your classroom. So I want to start off here with the Start Young slide, Michelle. So there's one thing to think about when we're talking about computational thinking is that we all actually are innate computational thinkers. It's something we do early on, essentially from the time we're born forward. A lot of the way we think would be considered computational thinking. Something to keep in mind is that computational thinking isn't necessarily just thinking like a computer. It's being able to reason, to break things down and make sense of it. And as we help learners actually begin to think about these different processes that relate to computational thinking, which we're going to get into here in a minute, that metacognitive process actually improves a learner's ability to do these kinds of things, to navigate, diagnose, to solve problems when they're confronted with them in and outside of school. The more we do this, the more muscle memory it becomes. And so I used to play golf a lot, and one of the examples I got was from an Australian golfer that said missing one day of practice takes about a week to make up. And it's similar to learning. When we stop learning, it's hard to make up for those steps. So the more we do this, the more muscle memory we get, and the more relevant it becomes to our learners as we work with them on introducing computational thinking. Lastly, it's a very versatile skill. It's everywhere. We use it all the time, whether we are deliberate about it or not, whether it's happening to us or around us. And like any muscle, though, we can get stronger, we can get better at it the more deliberate we are with its use. And so if we go to the next slide here and talk about what computational thinking is, computational thinking starts with decomposition. It moves on to pattern recognition, abstraction, and algorithmic thinking. We're going to talk about each one of these and then provide some examples of how you could see that in a classroom. There's a lot of debate when it comes to learning behind the nature versus nurture kind of thing. In my mind, computational thinking is a little bit of both. We're born with the ability to reason and think computationally, but we also need to nurture that as we help our kids. And it starts with the physical. It starts with learning to do it with things that we see around us, and then we begin to become more abstract thinkers, and we're able to do it mentally. And one way to really do this is begin to look at our daily routines and understand how this relates to those, so it becomes more relevant for our students. You can go to the next slide, thanks. So let's start with decomposition. So this is as simple as saying it's just breaking things down. So breaking things down into smaller, more manageable pieces. One idea is in the early grades, just like you see here, you have a child building with wooden blocks. Think back to maybe your students or when you were in school, what you used to do when you were building with those blocks. Whether they're building roads or towers and things like that, you often try to search for specific kinds of blocks to build those structures. And so when you're building, you're actually doing the process of decomposition because you're trying to find the individual pieces that you need to make the larger picture. And then at the end of that playtime with the blocks, you break it down back into those smaller pieces, often putting those blocks in specific storage containers or things like that. So decomposition happens both during the creation and maybe the breakdown of an idea. Pattern recognition essentially is looking for similarities within a problem that you've experienced before or that you're encountering now. And so what you're doing is you're trying to find patterns that you can see happening across different situations that you've been in. So again, working with early kids, one way to think about this is going back to the blocks and identifying which shape of blocks actually are going to help provide you the best support for your tower or for your bridge and things like that. And as you begin to build with those blocks, you become quote unquote more proficient with building. With older students, that might be more specific around, you know, a topic they're learning in mathematics or science, of identifying a pattern that helps them solve a longer equation or solve a specific scientific theory. Moving on to abstraction. So this is focusing on the details. This is finding what really matters and what really means the most within that problem that you need to take care of. So oftentimes this is removing any differences to make the solution or your strategy work across different kinds of problems. So understanding abstractions require you to make generalizations, draw conclusions, and essentially use other problem-solving techniques throughout a process to imagine something that you can't see or touch. So one example right there, we have some cupcakes, which look really good actually right now. We can't see oftentimes all the components within that cupcake, but we have to be able to visualize it as we're making it. You know, as we put in the flour and the sugar and in this case, the raspberries or the cocoa, whatever it might be, as you begin to put those things together, you're trying to imagine what it's going to be at the end. And oftentimes if you're a baker, you find shortcuts, you find ways that putting these different ingredients together in a specific sequence allows you to be successful at different things, not just making cupcakes. This might be often difficult for your younger learners, trying to help them see things abstractly. One way I always think about this is think about literacy development and being able to learn how to read. So the physical representation of a letter, the letter A, the letter B, but then the abstract sounds that those letters represent. Oftentimes there's not really any rhyme or reason why this letter looks this way, but yet it makes the sound. And so being able to deal with abstraction tends to be something that we get better with as we grow older. And this is often one of the computational skills that develops after all the rest. You can go ahead and move on. Sorry about that, Michelle. So algorithmic thinking, this is really what it sounds like. It's like, you know, when you learn to solve specific math type of equations, there were specific steps that you had to follow. So there's specific steps or rules that you use to solve similar problems. And one thing that always stuck out in my mind when I think about algorithmic thinking is this right here. You have an example of Lego. And so a simple little flower box that is built, and it shows you the sequence step by step of how you begin to add those blocks together to get your final design or whatever it is that you're building. Sometimes algorithmic thinking can manifest itself really young. So if you have two children playing, and let's go back to the wooden block example, you have two children playing together, and I'm going to say I'm one of those smaller children, and I walk up to my friend and I say, hey, how'd you build that tower? How'd you build that bridge? Well, now my friend's going to think about how they built it in order to explain it to me, and oftentimes that's going to come in different steps. And so we use that algorithmic thinking all the time to explain things, how a chef might explain a recipe, how you might teach your own child at home how to do the dishes. There's specific steps. You rinse them off, you place them this way in the dishwasher, whatever that might be. There's always a way that we're explaining things, and that's algorithmic thinking. Real quick, just a little quote by one of my favorite educators and people that really think about thinking, Seymore Papert, which is, my central focus is not on the machine, but on the mind. And the goal is to use computational thinking to forge ideas. So as we begin to look at computer science, the focus isn't on the computer, it's not on the programming, it's focusing on our minds and being able to develop those skills and that intuition and those abilities that allow us to put ideas together to find solutions. But now let's go ahead and moving from there, let's take a look at how these actually look in the early grades, and then how these would really look in maybe, middle school and up. So thinking about early grades, we have the idea of CS principles. So your computer science principles all around us, if you think about it. So here's an example. There's a picture of an umbrella and it's raining. Rain is part of the water cycle. Sequencing is a big part of understanding computer science and how you put things in order and how that order determines specific outcomes. And so the water cycle is a natural cycle that happens all the time. So it rains, that water collects in lakes and rivers and the oceans, then it evaporates, it condenses in the air, creates clouds, and then it rains again. And so understanding there's a specific sequence and order to that can help students understand basic computer science principles. The next is conditionals, understanding natural and perceived consequences. For example, if I put water in the freezer, then it turns to ice. If I nurture a seed in the ground and give it water, the plant grows, else nothing happens. And so these things are all around us. I always like to ask kids to create their own if-then or if-then-else statements based on natural consequences or perceived consequences they see around them, and you always get really fun examples. The next is loops. So loops oftentimes tie into the sequencing piece. So back to the water cycle, it is a cycle that is going nonstop. We don't really know where it starts or where it ends, but it is something that continues. And the last is debugging or troubleshooting. This is just thinking about what worked and what didn't work. So when you're working with students, especially young students, oftentimes there are quarrels or things that happen within a classroom, and you help kids understand, what was the miscommunication, things like that. This is all falls under the debugging and troubleshooting. And so helping them put it in those contexts helps them begin to think forward with those computer science principles. And then where to start, though, with younger kids especially. You have to start somewhere, really. And the easiest way to start is using what you have and starting unplugged. Computer science, understanding computer science and its principles, reinforcing computational thinking doesn't require technology all of the time. So when thinking about it, to begin understanding computer science with your younger students, go to things that you might already have in your classroom, like blocks, playing cards, construction paper, recyclables, all can be used to explain or demonstrate a specific process. There are a lot of things you could do that might involve technology that are free. So there's a lot of websites like code.org or MakeCode or Sphero.edu where you can begin to explore these things in that computer realm. And if you don't have class sets of everything, begin to create roles. Roles are really important to help students understand also that sequencing, that proper order to things, and by explaining that, the materials person needs to go get the materials first, and then from there you have your maybe your director, and that director is going to tell everybody else what they need to do with those different materials, things like that. And the best part about all of this is you don't need to be the expert. You can learn along with them. That's one thing that's great about a lot of this is the barrier of entry is really, really small, and you can begin to work with your kids to begin to better understand these things yourself. A lot of stuff that's really good too is beginning to help your students visualize this stuff. So by building and putting together these different things, whether it be with wooden blocks or playing cards or whatever it might be, that visualization of the physical is going to help them move into that abstract later on. So now let's look at integrating these things into the classroom with older students. So the first part that really makes this meaningful, particularly with your older kids, is to make connections with them, to help them form those connections of how computational thinking and computer science principles are things that they're already doing. It's things they already see and experience in their environments. And one thing that's important with that is that it's just not for science. Computational thinking and computer science are things that we can explore and experience outside of our traditional science classrooms. And to use a quote from one of my favorite baseball movies, If you build it, they will come. Actually, I changed it to if you identify it, they will too. If you begin to identify these different computational thinking principles and strategies as you go through your day with your students, they'll begin to identify those themselves. So helping them see the need for metacognition and to think about these things is super important. And then they begin to make those connections for themselves, which then empowers them to really take charge of their learning. So next, let's go through some, oh, nope, you're all right. Let's go through some specific examples of each part of computational thinking, but with older students. So the first one, again, back to decomposition. So anything that's going to break anything down is going to be great for decomposition. So these are just a few different examples. So a diagram, so here we're showing the story arc there, you know, starting with the exposition up to the climax and then to the end. Graphic organizers are great. So this one's really fun. This one, they're talking about tortilla. They look at it from the culture of the people of Mexico versus the people in Spain, and how those tortillas relate to all sorts of different things. So they're breaking down the idea of tortilla. Again, computational thinking, decomposition, but not in a scientific concept. The next would be, oh, I misspelled something there. Should say fractions, not free actions. There we go, look at that. Live editing. You're not going to get that anywhere else. So fractions. So understanding fractions is decomposition. So a recipe is always a great way to demonstrate fractions. So as you break things apart or put things together, you can use fractions to explain that. And then base whatever. So base 10, base 5, anything like that is a great way also to demonstrate decomposition in mathematics. So now going on to the next one. I know you were really excited there, Michelle, to change the slide.
My computer has a mind of its own.
Pattern recognition. I know I said this is going to be for older kids, but I always like to bring this back. Early learners are great for beginning to understand pattern recognition. If you are a kindergarten teacher, if you are a first grade teacher, if you're a pre-K teacher, you have calendars and you have patterns that the kids are, you know, predicting throughout the month. You know, you put shapes up for each day and they're going to predict which one comes next, things like that. Helping students, as you work with your older students, helping them understand pattern recognition in literature is really, really important as well, because oftentimes authors will introduce a specific pattern where it's part of character development or the story arc, and being able to understand what that pattern or pattern of events or pattern of language used is implying about the story itself. And then cycles in science. There's all sorts of natural phenomena that happen around us that are cyclical, whether it's biological, meteorological, geological, all those different types of sciences you can look at. Is there's so many types of different patterns and cycles worth studying. And then abstraction. So abstraction always comes back to me to the idea of literacy development, understanding how to read. When you're able to actually look at a letter and understand what that letter is and the sound it makes, you're really being able to grasp what abstraction is. The other is being able to put words together to understand their meaning is also a form of abstraction. So as you get older and you're reading more difficult texts, things like that, sometimes the context of the word is what helps you understand what that word means. And so being able to find meaning from the context is actually an advanced way of utilizing abstraction to help you understand what you're doing. So there's a lot of inferencing that happens when you begin to work on abstraction. And then the last one here is the idea of algorithmic thinking. So obviously this applies to all of the maths that are out there. Algorithmic thinking is that logical step-by-step process, putting things in an order that help you go from point A to point B being the solution. Excuse me. And as I mentioned before with the abstraction, as students get older, they begin to read far more informational text versus nonfiction text, versus fiction in the classrooms. And being able to understand informational text is a different skill oftentimes than being able to understand a fictional text. And so being able to to take out those orders or specific details that happen in a specific order is a great way to think about algorithmic thinking, because there is a proper sequence to get to that final solution. And in the end, it's all about cycles with a lot of this, understanding that order. So when you're looking at computer programming, there is a specific order to write your code in order to get that desired outcome. But just to kind of summarize what I've said here, is it's all around us. Computational thinking, computer science principles happen all around us. The idea of computer programming was our efforts as human beings to essentially replicate things that happen in nature. And the more we begin to view our environments and understand it in the context of computational thinking and computer science, the easier it is for not only us, but for our students to begin to actually apply those to understanding computer science for themselves.
Thanks, Jeremy. So Jeremy just spent a lot of time talking about how we can see computational thinking and computer science all around us, that what we're teaching on a daily basis is what is computer science. It is computational thinking, just long as we bring it up and we recognize that, so that as our students get older, computer science doesn't seem as scary. And us at Sphero, we've created a course called Computer Science Foundations to do exactly that, to really support you, the teacher, as well as the students, or even the parent, in implementing and getting started with computer science. So one thing that, we've all seen, we've all heard, that computer science, it's not just about programming, but it's really teaching about design, logical reasoning, and problem solving. So beyond just sitting behind a computer terminal and programming. So we know it's important. However, we've seen from multiple studies that most teachers and educators and parents, they just don't feel equipped to teach computer science. They need something easy to use and high quality resources to get started, to make themselves feel comfortable, as well as their students to get excited about computer science and computational thinking. And especially in today's world, where we're seeing a lot of parents also becoming the educator or the support educator at home, as their teachers are trying to implement this as well. So what we did at Sphero, we created something called Computer Science Foundations. It is 3 courses with 72 lessons, and each of those lessons is about 45 to 60 minutes that can be extended based on how you want to do that lesson. It's compatible with almost every type of device you can think of. And the other great thing is you can do it with 1 or 2 students per robot, or you can even have 1 student per robot and another student with the device, and a socially distant type setting where they both can access the content at the same time. One of the key benefits with Computer Science Foundation is that when we designed this, we went under the mantra that you learn, they learn. That's you, the educator, will learn alongside the student. We know that's important because many of us were not trained in computer science, computational thinking, the words that Jeremy all shared, abstraction, decomposition. We knew them, but we didn't understand them in the context of computer science as we do now. And it's important that we're teaching, we're learning together as a community. One of the other things that we felt was really important is social emotional learning. That just because you're learning computer science, or just because you're learning math or science or ELA, that don't ignore the social emotional learning components. So this is iterated multiple times throughout each of these courses, but specifically we have one whole unit designed around empathy and understanding each other's differences. So not only are they hitting those key social emotional learning components, but also learning how to program and computational thinking skills at the same time. It's also standard aligned. So we align to the CSTA standards and GSS, as well as various state standards. And then the other great thing about it, it is flexible in terms of implementation, timing, depending on where you feel ready to start or your students at the same time, and it can work in a remote learning environment. But what if my educators don't know how to code, what if my parents don't know how to program? That's okay. As I mentioned before, it's key that this is learner-led. We are supporting both the educator as well as the student in learning those computer science foundations. It comes with a printed educator guide to really give you tips and hints along the way as your students interface with the content via the Sphero EDU app. As I mentioned, it's flexible. So we have nine different content themes. Jeremy mentioned a lot about that computer science does not have to exist, and computational thinking does not have to exist in our standard computer science class, but actually exists in all around us. So each of these themes that we've covered are different classes that a student might take 3rd through 5th grade. So whether it's the A in STEAM, the arts, whether it's nature and science, storytelling and ELA, game design, navigation, missions, which covers a lot of mathematics and some social studies elements as well. So really trying to tie in those computer science components with what you're already teaching in the classroom. So whether you're an elementary teacher or a media specialist, a middle school teacher, or even high school where you're teaching students who have never used computer science or don't know anything about programming, you're able to start with this. Some example pathways that we might see is, let's say you're an elementary teacher, you're in your 3rd grade class and you want to teach 1 lesson per week. A pathway could be you start with our draw lessons, you start with the A in STEAM, you start with some of those artistic components, but then you move over to shapes and numbers, which talks about mathematics, and you get into that beginning block. And when we mention beginning block, we're talking about some basic movement commands, some simple loops as well. Then moving back over to some art, starting to teach the intermediate block. An intermediate block, students are going to start learning about conditionals, those if-then statements, introducing to some sensors within the robot. And then really sticking with that where they see their students are strong, staying at that same level, going across multiple different content areas. So integrating what they've learned in computer science, putting it into their ELA classroom or in their SEL time across empathy and storytelling as well. So we have different pathways depending on what type of teacher you are. So if you're a middle school teacher or multiple middle school teachers, a science teacher, SEL, or game design, which focuses a lot on mathematics, each teacher can teach a different pathway. They can teach together or they can teach separately as well. So that way you can grow as a team and not just as an individual teacher. Or again, you're a library media specialist. You teach 6th through 8th grade. You have multiple robots that maybe your students are checking out. They can work, you can assign lessons that a similar level that reinforces potentially those beginning block or intermediate block skills, but covers multiple themes. Or you're teaching 8th graders who have a foundation in computer science and are starting to get into some JavaScript. You can do the same thing there, which reinforcing those skills across multiple themes. Again, Computer Science Foundations is extremely flexible. We've designed it so that you can learn with your students as well as implement it across multiple classes. So I'm gonna kind of switch gears now. We talked about how to do computer science and computational thinking without Sphero, how to do it with Sphero in a very guided experience. But as we all know, we're in a very new environment, either a socially distant classroom where your class sizes are smaller, you're trying to keep everyone 6 feet apart, or you're at home. I know we here in Colorado, our kids are at home right now. So I think the first day of school for Jeremy's kids was yesterday, and for my kids, it's tomorrow. So we're trying to think of different ways to help support you as well in this new environment. And Sphero.com, we have created multiple guides to help you with that and created some classroom tips for you to integrate our current products. The first tip that we have, of course, is stay 6 feet apart. and as well as created a program with Sphero Bolt to make sure you're measuring that 6 feet distance at all times. We encourage you to delegate different roles amongst your students so that you might have one student who is holding and controlling the robot, just holding onto the robot, while the other student has the tablet, the device, the Chromebook, and is actually doing the programming. So delegating those roles and not switching back and forth. We encourage that you minimize contact with products, so keeping them in the same space, not where students have to cross over each other a lot, but keeping everything in one specific area in either a certain corner or the center of the classroom so that they don't have to pass as many students. The fourth thing is slow down. If you've ever used a Sphero robot and been in a classroom with a 4th grade student, the most fun thing to do is turn up the speed as fast as possible. And how fast can you run it into the wall? It's a lot of fun, but encourage your students to slow it down. Whether they're programming or they're just driving it and doing some more engineering design activities, slow the robot down. Same thing if you're using little bits and thinking about some of our motors and the wheels, maybe if they're designing a car, either they slow it down or we choose a different activity where we don't have that mobility. We encourage collaboration through online tools. So both with Sphero EDU as well as Littlebits Classroom and Littlebits' newest app called Littlebits Fuse app. Encourage students to share their programs across those tools, either using Google Classroom within those tools, email, so that they're communicating that way versus heads down in a little group. Now we're working remotely, we communicate through tons of online tools. Encourage your students to do the same thing because they will also see that in the workforce as they develop those skills. And then test with hybrid lessons. One thing that we saw in the spring was students would actually program with Sphero EDU, and then they would send their programs to either their teacher or their friend who might have checked out a robot, and they would actually film that robot and test that program. Same thing with Littlebits. We have the Fuse app where students can design virtual circuits. Send that to their teacher or their friend to actually build that circuit for them in real life and collaborate that way. In addition to all of these recommendations, we have designed a series of socially distant activities that you can implement in your classroom. All of these are free. They're on Sphero EDU, or you can find them on Littlebits Classroom. Oops, next slide. And then finally, if you go to Sphero.com, you can check out our COVID-19 resources and download our guide. We have guides not only for things I mentioned, tips to use in the classroom, but classroom management. Most importantly, how to clean your products safely. Luckily, a lot of Sphero products are waterproof, such as Sphero Bolt, but also Littlebits products as well, and how to spray them down and or just slightly wipe them clean. And then finally, Sphero at Home. So if you're looking to find the right resource for your students at home, or you have multiple students at home, we are launching all of these new Sphero Kits, which will be announced tomorrow, so you get a sneak peek. The first is the Littlebits at Home Learning Starter Kit. It comes with 9 bits and a bunch of accessories so that students can really get started inventing at home. We also have the Sphero Mini at Home Learning Kit. And this kit, it comes with 30 activity cards, 15 of which are really focused in on those computational thinking skills. They're able to build different obstacles and program their way through it. And finally, Sphero Bolt with an at-home learning bundle, which comes with a guide, really helps parents who are assisting students at home getting started with Bolt, as well as a series of lessons that progress from draw all the way through JavaScript. All of that is included with the Sphero Bolt when we purchase single units moving forward. So that's it. Would love to answer some questions if there's any questions today. I know this slide deck will be shared with you as well as the recording. Otherwise, you can always reach out to us at education@sphero.com, but I'll take a minute for any questions. And if there are none, that's okay as well. Sounds like, it doesn't look like there are, I'm looking through the chat. So no questions as of right now.
We do have one request though.
Okay.
Laura Spence would like to review the graphic again. So the graphic will be included in the presentation slide deck, correct?
Yes, it will be.
Great.
Which graphic?
I'm not sure which one she was speaking of, but
Probably the CSF one. Looks. Okay. Yep, all of this will be included. And again, you can reach out to us at education@sphero.com. All of these will be included in the slides that you receive, as well as the link to the COVID-19 resources. And most exciting, we are going to be giving away both a Little Bits Educator Starter Kit as well as a Sphero Bolt. And those winners will be announced in the next few days. All right, well, thank you for your time today.
Right.
We hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you all so much. This was a wonderful presentation. For those of you who are interested in keeping your learning going today, we have another session lined up at 1 o'clock. We have, sorry, drum roll, very dramatic drum roll. Farm Shelf for Education. So we are going to learn how Farm Shelf, the smart hydroponic indoor farming unit, can be used to feed and empower students through revolutionary food systems. If you haven't registered for that yet, please do so. You can go to tech.com, our events page. There you'll see the Tech Virtual Summit, and there you can register for all of these amazing sessions coming up. We hope to see you at 1 o'clock. Bye.